now we're going to move on to our next topic for today, which is taking a look at managing some of these attributes within Vissim. So we're going to take a look again at how to view some of these attributes, how to define any new attributes, and then how we can also update these attributes either in a static way or in a dynamic way. So within the network, I know we've covered a lot of objects so far. So all of these objects contain some attribute values. And these attributes are either going to be predefined and kind of automatically created within Vissim. And then there's also some attributes that you can create that are user-defined, and these can be added separately within Vissim. And you'll see that this term, this user-defined attributes, is usually shortened just and called as a UDA. So you'll probably see that terminology, and I'll probably be saying that for the rest of the session today. So in order to access any of the attributes, again, you can open up any list for any network object, and then you can always select that wrench icon in order to open up that attribute window. And on the attribute window itself, you'll see on the left is a list of all of the available attributes within that particular object. And this will include any predefined object as well as any user-defined attribute. And you'll see here that all of the predefined options, you'll either see them here with like a green circle, and then some of the user-defined ones will be shown in black, which we'll take a look at when we go to the example file. And then on the right-hand side are a list of all of the selected attributes. So these are going to be all the ones that are actually included and shown within that object list. And so, of course, you can always move or change the order of any of these as well using some of these arrow icons either on the side or on the top. And then if you do want to add a new attribute to any object, you can go up to that base data menu, and then you can select the user-defined attributes option. And that's going to open up this UDA window here on the right-hand side. And this will allow you to add new attributes, and you can also edit or delete or duplicate any of those attributes as well. And whenever you're adding a new user-defined attribute, this window is going to pop up. And this will allow you to further configure how that attribute is going to be used, as well as how some of the data sources that are going to be used for that particular attribute. So within this window, up at the top is where you can select the object that the attribute is tied to. And then you can also enter in a short name and a long name for that attribute, and as well as a comment just describing what exactly that attribute is doing. And then below that is where you can select the data type. So you can have this, there's many different options you can choose. It could be an integer, a floating point, a Boolean, or even a text field. And then you can also change that source type to either be data or formula. And over here on the right is where we kind of have the option that's shown if you have a data type selected. So the data source will really just be a blank cell that you can then fill in with any static value. This is particularly useful if you are trying to add in, maybe you've got some count information that you want to use to compare within Vissim itself. So you can kind of use that static data type UDA in order to contain some of that information. The other option, again, is a formula type UDA, and this is going to have the value will be updated and calculated based on the formula that's entered. This can be useful, especially if you've got, like in this case, we're just applying a factor to another, in this case, to the AM count UDA. So these formulas can be useful to apply any factors and can be used to make any other updates that you need to just automatically calculate some values. And then down at the bottom is where you can choose any sub-attributes. So if you have the simulation run selected, the attribute values will be listed and recorded for each simulation run. If you have time interval selected, those attribute values will be listed for each of the time intervals. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at how we can update some of these attributes. We're going to take a look again at one method using kind of more of a static update, and then we're going to take a look at updating those dynamically. So again, the first option here for the static update is going to actually be looking at updating the vehicle data as the simulation is running. And Vissim does have a built-in object in order to accomplish this. And this object is called the vehicle attribute decisions. And these can be placed on any link or connector. And as a vehicle crosses this point, that's when an attribute will be updated. So in order to add any of these attribute decisions, again, you'll just want to make sure that option is selected in the network object toolbar. And then you can either right-click on a link and then choose the add option in order to place that. Or you can also press Control and click in order to place that specifically on a link. So once you have any of those added, that new attribute decision placed, it's going to open up that attribute decision list down at the bottom of the network editor. And this is going to be where you can update any of that information. So the vehicle attribute decisions don't have a separate window or anything to update data. All of that can be just done directly within the list here. So this is where you'll see the attribute decision number and name. And then you can also change which vehicle classes that applies to, whether it be for all vehicles, or you can set any specific classes. And then you can also set the target attribute that you want to update. So here's under that ATPR column is where you can choose the attribute that you want those vehicles to update as they pass over this decision. And then you can set the decision type to either be a fixed value, so whenever a vehicle crosses it, you can update it to a set value, or you can choose to pull the value from a distribution, which will set the value however you have that distribution set up. And then finally down here at the end is where you can set the time period this is active for, like maybe you only want to change the decision for a specific time period within that simulation. You can always set the from and the to time here as well in order for that to be active for only that particular time period. All right, and then if we move over to the dynamic option, this is actually a new option that was added within version 2021, and this is called an attribute modification. And all of the attribute modifications are located under this action menu, which is also where some of the other scripting options are available as well. And so really these attribute modifications are a way to perform some attribute updates without having to write some of those external COM scripts, but rather allow you to write a formula within Vissim itself in order to update some of those attribute values. So all of the attribute modifications, again, those also have the number and the name. And then they also have the run type. And the run type really just determines how often that attribute modification code is called in order to make those updates. And so this can be either done manually at a time that you would like to run that. You can also choose to have it run automatically either before or after the simulation is started. Or you can also choose to have it begin either at the start or end of at each time step. And using that time step either at the start or the end, this is going to be more of a continuous update that's going to happen throughout the entire simulation. And then here's where you can also set the time. So here, again, you can also set that from and to time if you want it to only be active for a certain time within that simulation. You can also choose the period, which is really for how many time steps it's going to be applying to. And then you'll also see the object type will be listed here, and this will be the object that's going to be updated. You can apply any particular filter to these objects as well. And then you'll also see here the target attribute. In this case, it's the number, so the link number would be updating. And then you can change this to any any editable attribute, and this can be either predefined or user-defined. And then finally is the attribute computation column, which is what would contain any formula that you're going to use to make any of those updates to those attributes. So all of these kind of options for the attribute modification can also be edited within this attribute modification window rather than doing it through the list. So if you double click or edit any of those attribute modifications, you can then make any updates again to a lot of that base data. So if you wanted to change when this will be executed, the object type, and then the attribute that's going to be updated. You can also, again, apply any filters here. This filter itself will also be a formula that you can enter within this box. And then finally, the attribute computation as well will be in this lower box. And this is where, again, you can enter in that new formula in order to update the target attribute value that you have set up above in that kind of base data section. So in order to take a look at this in more detail, let's go ahead and move over to that example file. Okay, so in this case, what we've got here is vehicles traveling on this westbound link. We're going to kind of set up an option here for those vehicles to kind of take a detour based on whether this exit ramp is kind of congested. So basically, we've got our vehicle route down here. So let me select that here for the westbound direction. And we've got a few routes built up in here already. And the two main destination locations we're going to look at the detour for is one for Meridian Street and then one for Swanee Street. And essentially, instead of having vehicles take this exit ramp, if the exit ramp becomes congested and the speed falls below a certain threshold, we'll then have the vehicles switch and use these other two detour routes instead, which will have it kind of turn off before that exit ramp and then continue on to their destination. And so essentially what we're going to do within the attribute modification is basically change the relative flow values. So we would set these to be 0 and then set both of these to be 0.1 in this case in order to just kind of switch and turn on that detour whenever the speed of that exit ramp falls below a certain threshold. And so in order to accomplish this, we've also created a couple of user-defined attributes. So I'll go back to the base data menu and I'll select those user-defined attributes. And the first one we have here is for the links. And this is set to be a formula, but this is really just pulling in some already existing attributes that are already set up, but kind of buried down a few levels within the links themselves. And so what this is going to do is just calculate the average link speed for the current simulation run for that current time interval. And essentially what we've done here is we set this to a formula, and then we've just gone in here to look within that attribute list. And here's where you'll see, again, you'll see some of those user-defined attributes will kind of show up here with like a little person. And then if we scroll down, all this attribute here is looking for, let me just double click on that and it'll open it up for me. So essentially what we've done is we've kind of gone down, buried down a few levels. So we're looking within the link evaluation segments. And then we're looking at the average of those segments. And within that, we're looking at the speed, again, for that current simulation run for the current interval, just so that we can get current speed information as the simulation is running. And then the other attribute here that we've got collected, this is going to be something we're going to use with the vehicle attribute decision. And this is not used really in the calculation at all, but it's more to keep track whether or not a vehicle is on a detour or not. And we'll talk about this a bit more later. But essentially, this user-defined attribute is really just a Boolean value. So it's either going to be true or false, just depending on whether or not a vehicle is on, in this case, taking routes either 6 or 7. It won't be on a detour. If it is taking these routes 16 or 17, then it is going to be considered to be on a detour. So from here, let's go ahead and take a look at the attribute modifications. So we've got a couple here, and essentially what we're going to do is for one of these, let's go back here. So one of these will will kind of control the settings for 6 and 7, and then one modification will control the settings on the relative flow values for 16 and 17. So if I open up the first one here, you'll see that in this case, we're going to be editing the static vehicle route. Again, you can choose any network object within Vissim here. And then in this case, we're going to be editing that relative flow value. And since we don't want to update the relative flow for all of the static routes, we just have a filter here applied. So in this case, it's going to only look at routing decision number 4. So it's just going to look at the one here for the westbound direction, and it's only going to look at routes number 6 and 7 within routing decision number 4. So this kind of filters out everything else, and we'll make sure that we only update the relative flow values for those 2 routes. And then down at the bottom is where we have that calculation. So in this case, we're just doing a lookup here. So we're just looking at a link value. So we're going to look at the link object, and we're going to look for link number 41. And in this case, we're going to check, again, here's where we're using that user-defined average speed value. And we're just going to check the average speed of link number 41. And if it falls below 20 miles per hour, we're going to turn off the regular routes, number 6 and 7. Otherwise, we're going to leave those routes turned on here, which is shown by that 0.1. And we kind of have the opposite set here. In this case, we're going to have the filter applied for 16 and 17. And in this case, we're going to, if the average speed falls below 20, in this case, we're going to turn on these detour routes. Otherwise, we will leave those detour routes off. And I'll play the simulation here in a couple of minutes, and hopefully some of this you'll be able to see how this shows up in action. So the only other thing just wanted to quickly show you is those attribute decisions. So in this case, we just kind of want to use these so that we can just quickly see and kind of track those vehicles if they are on a detour or not. And so again, those attribute decisions, these are just a single line that's kind of placed on a link. And in this case, what we've done is we have placed this like small connector here, which is used only by those routing decisions. So let me go ahead and pull up that connector a little bit so that I can show you. So again, static routing decision number 4. The only routes taking that particular connector are going to be these detour routes, the routes number 16 and 17. So if a vehicle is on 16 or 17, it's going to travel over that connector and then also travel over these attribute decisions. And in this case, we're just going to take that detour attribute, that user-defined attribute, and if a vehicle travels over that, we're going to just set that value to 1. In that case, indicating that a vehicle is in fact on a detour. So let me go ahead and play this simulation here. And I've also set up some of the vehicle coloring as well. So anything that's showing up in blue is going to be going to be a no detour vehicle. So these are going to be all the vehicles that are not traveling over that small connector, so they won't hit that attribute decision. Any vehicles that are showing up in white are going to be those detour vehicles. So you should see those coming down and taking this kind of other detour option. I'm just going to play the simulation here for a bit more to see if we can get a few more of those detour vehicles showing up. Again, essentially the vehicles in this case, it's just looking at the link speed. Right here, we're looking at this link, number 41. And if that link speed falls below, the average speed falls below 20 miles per hour, that's when we're going to kick on and turn on that detour value. So some of those could be showing up here shortly. Okay, so here we go. You'll see again some of that backup is starting to occur on link 41. And then you'll see that some of those detours are starting to take place. So you'll see all those white vehicles. Instead of taking that exit ramp to go down to either Meridian Street or Swanee, will then take this shorter exit down here instead of taking that main exit ramp. So yeah, this is just one example where you can kind of do some quick route changing with those attribute modifications. But this is a really powerful tool that just allows you to do some simple built-in formulas without having to do any other code scripting in some external language and then setting that up outside of this, and you can do it all right in here to make some of those updates.